Out is a half-hour series focusing on the LGBTTQ community in Brandon, Manitoba, funded by the Community Radio Fund of Canada. The series shares the difficulties LGBTQ members have faced, the achievements and strides they have taken, and the support received from the community. We hope the stories shared will help those uncomfortable with any LGBTQ lifestyles understand the opposite point of view and become more sensitive to the struggles they face, as well as provide support and information for any LGBTTQ members in the area.
Hi, my name is Jan Eck, and I am very proud to help bring to you Out, a new series highlighting the lives of LGBTTQ citizens in Brandon, Manitoba. In previous episodes, we have talked about organizations such as the Sexual Education Resource Center and Brandon Pride that exist to serve the queer population here. But it is also our intent to feature the stories of individual lives, their achievements and challenges, and to simply reflect on their experiences and pastimes. This is not easy. Many Canadian LGBTQ people remain in the closet. According to a Fondation Jasmine Roy survey published in 2017, 54% of respondents reported they aren't out to their work colleagues, while 45% said that they keep their sexual orientation or gender identity hidden from classmates. I am going to step on a limb here and just predict that Brandon is even more closeted. That's a pretty strong limb, I think. Brandon is quiet, and it is conservative. So it's understandable that people are also quiet about things, especially about anything that intrudes upon their private lives. And among quieter people, not necessarily introverts, but depending on one's personality, coming out presents many unique and unwanted stressors. The attention can simply be too much. They are okay with coming out, but perhaps then have to deal with the never-ending questions from well-intentioned but overly intrusive people such as journalists like me. Having documented extensively various communities in Westman over the past 7 years with CJ106 FM, I've certainly encountered many people who are at least a bit hesitant to talk about their lives, and sometimes it requires some convincing that their story needs to be told. I am always grateful when they do share. These were some of the things that I had in mind when I became to know of Amelia, Reid and Margaret Yorke, a couple who have spent the last 45 years in a loving relationship here in Brandon, quietly enjoying their lives, only out to a few close friends. Millie and Margaret were suddenly thrust into the local spotlight as they were chosen to be Grand Marshals or honorary leaders for Brandon's Pride March this past June 2017. It was a great choice. Coming out in a small town is very difficult, but this couple, both at 79 years of age, represent Brandon's queer community in a sense that it is too now coming out strongly after a very long time. Millie and Margaret were great as Grand Marshals. They gave touching speeches and attended tirelessly to the media who were all over this remarkable story. I had heard from several Pride celebrants how they had been able to have wonderful conversations with them. They were inspiring to everyone, and myself included. But as I had been talking with them throughout the week, they were also looking forward to when the bustle of Pride had calmed down for them. They had a birding trip planned and promised to sit down with me for an interview shortly after their return. I have often complained that as a gay man that role models have been very few and far between, and I find myself having difficulties relating to other gay men. I have lesbian sensibilities, I have often kidded myself. Millie and Margaret, as birders and naturalists, love hiking the trails even more than I do. I totally get that their idea of a great time is to go spend it in a quiet nature away from the difficult crowds. That's me, and look at them. Almost 80 and loving that routine. I am likewise attached in a long-term relationship with another like-minded man, and in Millie and Margaret, I can see ourselves doing what they do, simply just growing older together. For so long it has been very hard for me to accept life as a mature gay man, but I think I'm getting used to it. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to sit down with them and ask them about life in the past, the time before my first-hand knowledge of LGBT history. But really, I just wanted to get a sense of what it is like to live a fulfilled life to such an age with the one you love there beside you throughout the journey.
Hi, my name is Amelia Reid, and most people call me Millie, so I'm really known as Millie.
Okay, thanks, Millie.
And I'm Margaret Yorke, commonly called Mar.
Okay, thank you very much. And before we begin, is it accurate to say that you are reluctant role models? Meaning, while I can see you very much enjoyed the honor of Grand Marshals and being able to share your story, your lives are spent out of the spotlight. And I think I heard you mention that you were looking forward to some quieter moments.
Yes, you are right there. We are reluctant to be in the spotlight, but we hope that by doing this, that perhaps making a little noise might influence others who might still be questioning to, quote, come out. We really wanted to say that a relationship based on love is something to be celebrated. And people, especially the young who are questioning and discovering who they are, will feel comfortable to, and might notice that it is okay to be themselves. Our marriage is like any other marriage. It is a commitment to one another. We have our ups and downs, but we work through it through our love.
Okay, so we'll start at the time before you met. Can you describe your lives then? What you were doing, the mood of the time?
I had moved to Oakville after graduating from Brandon University. A marriage had failed. We had been separated for actually since 1967. So in 1970, I moved to Toronto and discovered that credit from Eaton's for furniture couldn't be arranged without my husband's signature. Fortunately, I had an air mattress and a sleeping bag, and it was sleep on the floor in my bachelor apartment until my first paycheck came in. And that was from the University of Toronto Lab Animal Science, where I was starting work. I practiced my driving skills on the QEW coming in, the expressway coming in from Oakville to Toronto in order to see the hippies. They were in Yorkville then, the youth, young people with long hair, and they were rebelling against society's expectations. Mm-hmm. And there was the smell of marijuana and rumored free love. That was the Yorkville at the time.
Yorkville folk scene. I think my mother might have spent a summer or two there.
I was living in Toronto at that time. I didn't know Margaret, but a trip to Yorkville was sort of to see the hippies. Yeah. And it was different. Uh-huh. But it was a changing time, though, for women as well.
Well, especially I was a little surprised about you needing your husband's permission for a credit line.
Well, definitely.
That is a sign of the times. It's changed quite a bit, so thank you for that.
I was going to mention the fashion at that time as well. The skirts became shorter, and slacks for women were being a little more acceptable. Perhaps not in the workforce, but definitely you could wear them downtown. Actually, it was in the 70s, I guess, when the pantsuit became quite popular for women.
I remember Elvis and Tom Jones wearing those too.
Yes. I had, this was before I met Margaret, but I had moved from Newfoundland in 1959. I had grown up in a community or in a family that was quite involved with the church. Mm-hmm. And I guess that was really the life I knew. And so I decided I had wanted to be a priest at that time, but I knew that that was not possible for women. And, but I did go to Toronto to study at the Anglican Women's Training College. Was there for 3 years, received my diploma in Christian education and certificate for scholar in theology from Trinity College. Then I did move to, I worked in Manitoba for another 5 years before moving back to Toronto again.
Was that your first time in Manitoba?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Not really my first time. With my program at Toronto and the Anglican Women's Training College, we had summer practicums, and 2 of them were spent in Manitoba, actually.
Okay.
No, sorry, I'm wrong.
Okay.
One was in Manitoba, the other was Saskatchewan. So 2 were on the prairies. It was my first time seeing flat country, and I liked it. I liked the prairies
The
right
big
from
sky.
the start. Yes.
Big sky, the sunsets, yes,
yes.
the horizon.
Yes.
It's very attractive, it is.
So it was another, when I moved back to Toronto, I went for a refresher course, and I was really questioning what I was going to do with the rest of my life. Anyway, I was working with the Downtown Church Workers Association at that point after I moved from Manitoba.
And what about feelings of being LGBT at that time?
Actually, we were not really part of the LGBT community
Right.
before and after we met. I think Margaret would agree.
But the feelings of same-sex attraction, did that conflict with you and say in the church studies?
Yes, and that we'll discuss that in a few minutes. But
Okay.
once we met, and we had to make that decision I had to make the decision whether I stay with the church and the work that I was doing or move.
Just before we talk about how you met, do you have any feelings about, do you want to share about being LGBT in that environment at that time?
Well, I was questioning
Okay, yes.
before I met Margaret, and even after. Yeah, I was just didn't know who I was. I had a friend who tried to match me up with a male, and that didn't work. But I really didn't know, whether I knew I had some attraction to women, but it was just, who am I? And that came
I understand that.
in a couple of years after.
Most of us understand that. It's because society is throwing one thing at you, and
Yes.
it makes you second guess yourself, kind of like all the way. I mean, I think I've even second guessed myself as little as 7 or 8 years ago.
I think I wanted to be married,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't have any too much feeling for the opposite sex, although I did have friends of the opposite sex and fellas that we went to High Park with and played ball, that sort of thing.
I, of course, was really questioning whether I was bi or I was attracted to women. I had a failed marriage, though he wasn't at fault, and at that time there was no divorce except on the grounds of adultery.
Another sign of the time from
That was
back
a sign
then.
of the time, yes.
All right, so it was 1970 in Toronto when you met. Can you tell us how that came about, please?
We met through a mutual friend. We had both spent a Christmas at Napanee with her family, or her family lived on an Ontario farm. We had met her in Manitoba, or Margaret had met her in Manitoba. She had invited us to her family for Christmas. Anyway, Marg owned a Cortina at the time, and I had not met Margaret. I drove up to Toronto, to Napanee with her, and we spent the Christmas there, or a few days after. And on the way back, we were into a rain-sleet storm. And I don't know if you know the Cortina. It was just a small car. And the 401, we were on the 401. I imagine you know that highway.
Very busy.
We managed to get off to a service station, and they were pretty good. Anyway, I thought that she was a pretty good driver. But I was also very happy to be back in my apartment. And it was several months later that I received a phone call from my friend in Napanee, or who was living in Kingston at the time, and she wondered if I would like a roommate to help cover the costs of my rent. I was reluctant. I had a roommate who got married and moved out, and I was looking forward to being on my own again. But at the same time, I was living in Toronto and living on a church paycheck, which wasn't all that much. So I reluctantly said, okay. After that, a few weeks or months, I can't remember now, the dates are hazy in my mind. Margaret eventually moved in. By the spring, we had fallen in love.
Oh, yeah.
So, and that we felt was for keeps. Felt that I couldn't continue with this relationship and stay working with the church. So I had to make a decision and decided that I would return to college or university to upgrade my education. I applied to York University, but at the same time I was thinking it was going to be really expensive to live in Toronto. And then I think, I had known people who had graduated from Brandon University because of my visits, and so I applied there and was accepted.
And by this time, I had completed a graduate level diploma course in microbiology, which I was able to, it was a 1-year program that I was able to work part-time and take it in 2 years. And I was ready to seek a new job. And so when Millie was accepted into BU, I contacted then the Brandon General Hospital. And of course they were happy to hear from me.
So you moved to Brandon?
So we moved.
So we moved to Brandon, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
When I moved back to Brandon, because I'm from Manitoba originally, but I lived everywhere else. I was in Montreal previous. I was in a really big city, and then I came to Brandon, small city. Was there any adjustment that you made at all? So it was a bit of an adjusting period for me.
Well, yeah, it wasn't so much for us, I guess, because Margaret was actually coming back to the province, her birth province.
Oh, okay.
And I had worked in Manitoba for a while, so it was easier in Toronto, I guess, if one were hiding who you were, than it would be in Brandon. But that wasn't a real concern at that time in our lives. We liked Brandon.
Okay, it's a livable city.
It's a livable city. It's close to the parks. Our interests in hiking and camping, canoeing. We have the Spruce Woods to the west and the Turtle Mountains to the south, and Riding Mountain National Park, and you have the Brandon Hills. So all of that helped us with being comfortable here and liking it. I, at the time, of course, when we first came, had to go to Brandon University and I got my BA from there and my Bachelor of Education. And so worked at the university daycare, the brand new daycare. That was my first job. After 10 years, I retired from there and was instructor at ACC. Okay. In early childhood education. Getting back to moving to a smaller community was no problem. We lived normal lives. We eventually bought a home and paid the mortgage off quickly.
Yeah, we certainly did, because interest rates at that time were 17%. You know, we've just come from a period when they've been 0.5%. That's quite a difference. Millie didn't mention that she had to come ahead to register in university, and I had an apartment to sublet and clean. And then she flew back to Toronto and we drove out here together. So we actually arrived in Manitoba in a snowstorm at the border.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Anyway, we weren't asked for about our relationship. It was easier, I guess, for women to be living together. I was asked once about our relationship. Not really about our relationship, but I had been invited to a function, and this was by a lesbian. I was working in the daycare at the time. Anyway, I denied who I was. I've been sorry ever since. But, but it was at a time still that one was a little afraid that you might lose your job.
Or other ramifications.
Or other ramifications. And working with children was one, I guess. I was a little afraid that, you know, some of the parents would put a different perspective on.
Absolutely.
That was...
Some fears.
Yeah.
Some fears, absolutely. Fear. Well, just to let you know that there's still people dealing with that today, and there's still people denying. I wouldn't beat yourself up over that.
I agree with you, yes.
So it's just something that us LGBT people go through.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, hopefully in the future they won't have to have that dilemma or that conflict.
Hopefully not.
One question we were often asked is if we were sisters. And we would simply answer no. It was a case of don't ask, we won't tell because no one asked after we said no. We don't know what they thought. Anyway, I do recall one incident, and this happened at work when AIDS and HIV were prevalent in the gay community in the village of New York. And one of my co-workers said, well, that's God's punishment for being homosexual. And I was silent. I would answer that. I would have something to say about that now, but I didn't at the time.
It hurts, eh? It hurts not to be able to respond, for fear of what people might say. And especially about something that's so mean-spirited in a way. You really want to defend people.
At least we know that it isn't God's punishment on the on the gay community.
So you were in the closet. Closet.
We were in the closet.
A deep closet.
When we had visitors, our shared bedroom became a single person's bedroom. Mm-hmm. Millie, you had to move down the hall.
I've been there. I had that same story. Yeah. Yes. You don't want people trying to figure things out or asking those awkward questions. You just remove any sort of prompt for that question. You've both had long professional careers. You've also managed to travel much and have seemed to have followed your interests, hiking, nature, birding, with much enthusiasm. Is there a secret to having a fulfilling, rewarding, and healthy life like this? Because I'm definitely interested in that.
The secret, I guess I've got a few things here on my piece of paper, secrets to a rewarding life. The big thing was for us, our bodies. We were aware that to have a healthy body, one required a healthy lifestyle. So we were into a healthy lifestyle, and it really started in our early years in Brandon. We took part in a healthy living plan sponsored by the YMCA. We have never looked back, and are still members of the Y, and we're still eating healthy. When I worked at ACC, in lunchtime, people always commented on my lunches. It got so, that you inspire me with what you're eating.
Both were relatively heavy smokers, and quitting wasn't easy, but we know it was a wise decision.
Was there anything that helped you quit?
Yes. It's funny. I was hypnotized by a doctor, and actually it was a doctor who was residing in Rapid City. And after I came out, I sat there while she went in, and I laughed. All I could do was giggle. So he did something to me, I don't know, but it was very interesting. I did one more trip back to him to make sure that it had worked, and it had. I haven't smoked since.
Your cravings quit?
Yeah, it quit right at that moment.
Gosh.
It was strange.
It worked so well for Millie, I thought I would try it. I could hardly wait to get out of the office to get a cigarette.
Okay, let's talk about some of your interests. I think we should give some time to your interest, because I know this meant so much to your life. It maybe probably just kept you sane and focused. It's what you wanted to do with your life.
Well, we did have similar interests.
Yeah.
And of course, Brandon was ideal because of all the parks, as I mentioned before. Yeah. We joined the Westman Wilderness Club. In fact, we were two founding members. Would help lead some of their backpacks and hikes and riding mountain. We still enjoy getting out hiking. We don't do as much as we used to. We certainly don't do the backpacks either now.
Oh, several decades living as LGBT people in Canada. You must have been aware of a lot of the historic moments in these last few decades of struggle and advancement of LGBTTQ rights. Can you reflect on any of those?
I think we remember, because we heard it, Trudeau's famous quote that the state has no place in the bedrooms of the nation. And he made that in 1967. I looked that up, and when he was Justice Minister. And then he became Prime Minister, and it was in 1969 that homosexuality was decriminalized. And another date that we noticed was when same-sex marriage in Manitoba, and I think that Manitoba was certainly not the first to do it, but they weren't the last.
No.
So that was in September 16th, 2004.
Okay.
And another one that I noted, and this was because the World Health Organization, they took until 1990 to take homosexuality off the list of mental disorders, which is where it was when I first was questioning.
After 45 years as a couple, you decided to marry in 2015. Again, if I may ask for some more reflections, have you always desired or thought about marriage?
Well, for one thing, we were not getting any younger. But the wedding itself, we had discussed it for a number of years before 2015. I, myself, having been part of the church, Margaret was also part of the Anglican Church, we were waiting for perhaps the recognition of same-sex marriage within the canon law of the Anglican Church. And that didn't seem to be coming, and it wasn't very hopeful that it would come. Finally, we decided we'll just get married. Although, before I go ahead, our priest at the time, we had gone to visit him, and he was willing, but because it wasn't canon law, we decided no, we didn't want to put him in that position. But he did come to the marriage ceremony and give us a blessing following the ceremony. It was a small ceremony held at the Discovery Center down the hill.
Perfect.
From where we live.
Perfect.
It was a warm day, but a very windy day. And the ceremony was beautiful. We have good memories of it.
We put an announcement in the Brandon Sun, which I thought maybe we should caption, "No, we're not sisters." But we didn't. We went with the traditional announcement.
Yes. Moving forward, 2016 was your first Pride event in Brandon. How did that feel then? Or tell me, how did you come across to even go?
Well, we were a little overwhelmed. We decided we would go because the first Pride event was the year before, and we had not gone. So we just wanted to experience the Pride Parade. We were overwhelmed with the support that Brandonites were giving same-sex couples.
But then to represent at Brandon Pride as Grand Marshals, it must have been a thrill and an honor. What are some of your reflections on your feelings of that day?
It was a thrill in 2017 as the Grand Marshals. And I guess it was the first time that we had openly walked down the streets in Brandon holding hands. That was really fun. And it was great for me to see nieces and nephews at the park. We also wanted to maybe encourage some of the others of our own age or younger who are still not out, that it's not too bad in Brandon.
Okay, I started interviewing people at the back of the parade, and it was kind of difficult catching up to the front because you have so much hiking experience. You were keeping a good pace going.
We had been told we had to keep up with that car that was playing the music and stopping the traffic.
Oh, okay, so yeah, so they were keeping the pace.
We're used to walking the streets of Brandon.
The other thing, we were impressed with the police chief because it was the chief of police and he was there in uniform, and we heard that they weren't at the Toronto.
Oh yes, that's right. Will we be seeing you again at next year's Pride?
Hopefully.
For sure.
We're all healthy.
You approach 80, you've lived your 70 years and 10.
Yeah, so 79 both, right?
I will be celebrating my 80th birthday in September.
Okay.
So it's not too far away.
Happy
I'm
birthday.
still 79.
Like design 79 forever. Yes, okay. Well, I want to say thank you to you first, okay? I really appreciate you, reluctant activists, to get a few minutes of your time, and thank you for sharing your story with
Done a good
everybody.
job. You're doing well. Great.
Thank
You very much.
Thank you kindly. That was Amelia Reid and Margaret Yorke, a loving same-sex couple for almost 45 years, and having just recently had been married, They held hands in public for the first time as Grand Marshals of Brandon Pride 2017. I hope you, as I did, enjoyed getting to know them a bit better. It has been a true pleasure to bring to you this episode about. My name is Jan Eck, and I have been your host. Thank you for listening to CJ 106 FM.